Everyone has a story, and sometimes there's more to it. People who saved lives or changed the world behind the scenes had humble beginnings, or were just ordinary people thrown into extraordinary situations. This is episode number 14, The Cotton King Without an Heir. The Galveston hurricane of 1900 remains the most devastating natural disaster in American history, obliterating the country's primary cotton port in Galveston, Texas, and killing an estimated 8,000 people before drifting back out to sea. 4 years later, with a paltry initial investment of $3,000 each, Monroe and a couple of close relatives launched what would become the most successful cotton company in the world, a venture that would ultimately lead to saving hundreds of thousands of lives. Monroe was born in Jackson, Tennessee in 1873. During the Reconstruction era following the war between the states, the South was undergoing changes and extreme hardships. The cotton industry had once fueled the economy of the South, but without slaves to work the fields, its future was uncertain. Monroe's father, with the notable middle name of Wisdom, survived 2 years in a Union prison camp and returned to Jackson to become president of the local bank. Monroe's maternal grandfather had been a Presbyterian minister. This Scottish Presbyterian heritage instilled in him virtues of thrift and frugality, both necessary to survive in the postbellum South. Upon graduating from Southwestern Baptist University in Memphis, like his father, Monroe went to work at the bank. He learned the business, watching as farmers and businessmen struggled to rebuild after the war. He studied the good and the bad decisions as they were being made, and formed his own ideas as he learned from these observations. It was said that Monroe was a lot like Jimmy Stewart's character George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, the most trusted man in their small town. However, Monroe wasn't destined to remain in the banking business. His future would be to revive America's cotton industry. In 1904, Monroe entered into a partnership with his brother Frank and Frank's brother-in-law, William, to buy and sell cotton. Their company was based in Oklahoma City, with its plentiful fields for cotton farming. Monroe remained in Jackson, Tennessee, using his connections and expertise to finance and help grow the company. Monroe visited Houston in 1907 to assess the growing city's potential as a new center for their venture. Like most Gulf Coast shipping concerns of the era, they would have established their operation in Galveston, but a hurricane had almost wiped it off the map only a few years before. However, oil had been discovered at Spindletop near Beaumont in 1901, so federal support for a ship channel was in the works for Houston. Drawing on the business wisdom he absorbed during his younger years at his father's bank, Monroe immediately recognized Houston's larger banking resources and access to railways and ports as ideal for his company's purposes. 7 years later, in 1914, the company had access to the deep-water ports of the Houston Ship Channel. For 33 years, Monroe lived in various hotels in downtown Houston and walked to work each morning carrying a sack lunch. The characteristics of frugality and thrift that enabled Monroe's family to thrive during the period of Reconstruction now helped their cotton company to prosper. Their company garnered the moniker that once belonged to the antebellum South, King Cotton. Monroe remained in Houston for the rest of his life, building a cotton empire that would make him and his partners among the wealthiest men in America as they headed into the 1930s. None of that ever seemed to go to Monroe's head, though. He was remembered by all for his friendliness, humility, and genuine kindness. Monroe never married, nor had any children to inherit his fortune. This created a somewhat complex legal predicament for a millionaire without an heir. His brother had already died, leaving Monroe and William each owning half of the company's stock. This meant that if one of them were to die unexpectedly, a hefty estate tax would require liquidation of the company they'd built from virtually nothing. To avoid this problem, in 1936, he created a firewall in the form of a charitable foundation. He put in $300,000 initially and got the commitment of 2 other trustees. The charter for the foundation stated its broad purpose as being the establishment, support, and maintenance of hospitals, homes, and institutions for the care of the sick, and the promotion of health, science, education, and advancement and diffusion of knowledge. Frugal to the end, when he died in 1939, Monroe's planning resulted in $19 million of his estate going directly to his philanthropic foundation rather than tax collectors. In today's money, that would be roughly the equivalent of $200 million. Monroe had left no specific instructions about how to achieve his foundation's vision. It wasn't yet associated with any particular cause, except that the Board of Trustees honored the charter with a focus on health care. The answer came 2 years later. In 1941, the state legislature appropriated $500,000 for the University of Texas to build a research hospital. The foundation trustees recognized the opportunity to fulfill Monroe's vision, offering to match the grant dollar for dollar under the condition that the research hospital would be located in Houston and named for its benefactor. Establishing a new research hospital during World War II was somewhat of a minor miracle in itself. Materials were scarce for construction that was non-essential to the war effort. What's more, you can't have a hospital without doctors, and most of them were committed to the armed services and unavailable at the time. For the first decade, the new hospital operated on the grounds of the James A. Baker Estate near downtown Houston. As the fledgling hospital's operations grew, several war surplus buildings were added in the late 1940s. The M.D. Anderson Cancer Center officially opened in a pink marble building at its present site in 1954, establishing the worldwide benchmark for cancer patient care and research ever since. That original building is now the hub of a vast complex that hosts the foremost cancer treatment facility in the world. M.D. Anderson treats well over 100,000 patients every year, employs a staff of nearly 20,000 people, and invests literally hundreds of millions of dollars in research grants. Since it was established in the late 1940s, about 1.5 million cancer patients have already been served by M.D. Anderson. The Galveston hurricane claimed thousands of lives in the span of hours more than a century ago. That cataclysmic event caused Monroe Dunaway Anderson to locate his cotton company in Houston instead, where the hospital bearing his name would eventually save millions of lives, thanks to a generous gift from a frugal cotton king with no heir. And that's his story. I'm Rodney Powell, and you're listening to the Everyone Has a Story podcast, a production of realmedia.us. If you like what you're hearing, how about sharing it with a few good friends? Better yet, share it with your kids. It'll give you something to talk about. Add it to your favorites so you can catch each new episode in all its freshness. Lord willing, we'll get together for another good tale. We won't be running out of stories to share because everyone has a story.